It was a typical summer evening in the small town where I grew up, hot, humid and sticky. The kind of weather that made you feel like the air itself was pressing down on you. The sky was a deep shade of grey, and the air had that electric charge that signalled an approaching thunderstorm. I've always loved storms, especially the ones that rolled in during the night. The rumble of thunder, the flash of lightning, the heavy drops of rain. Something about it all felt comforting in a weird way. But that night, the storm that came was anything but comforting. I had just finished dinner and was settling down in my room with a book when the first rumble of thunder echoed through the house. I smiled, looking forward to the show the storm would put on. My window was open to let in the breeze, but the air was still, too still. I remember thinking it was odd, but I shrugged it off. Then, the first flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a deep rolling thunder that seemed to shake the walls. That's when it started. The rain began to pour, hitting the roof with a steady rhythm. But there was something different about this storm. The lightning flashed again, but this time I swore I saw a shadow in the flash, something or someone standing out in the field beyond my backyard. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but then it happened again. Another flash, and the shadow was closer, more defined. It looked like a person, but it was all wrong. Too tall, too thin, and its face, it was just a void, like the light didn't touch it. I closed my window quickly, feeling a sudden chill despite the heat. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but my heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The thunder cracked again, louder this time, and I jumped as the lights flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. My phone was on the bed, and I grabbed it, using the flashlight to navigate my way downstairs. I needed to check the circuit breaker, to do something to distract myself from the growing fear gnawing at my gut. As I made my way down the stairs, the rain pounded harder against the windows, and the thunder became a constant rumble. It was like the storm was right on top of the house, refusing to move on. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. I froze. Who would be out in this weather? The knocks came again, more insistent this time. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached the door, peeking through the peephole. My blood ran cold. Standing on my porch, soaked to the bone, was the shadowy figure I had seen in the lightning. It had no face, just an empty void where its features should have been, and yet I could feel it staring at me, boring into my soul with its non-existent eyes. It raised a hand, long fingers curling into a fist, and knocked again, this time more forceful, almost angry. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I knew I shouldn't open the door. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The knocking continued, each one louder than the last, shaking the door on its hinges. The storm outside raged on, the lightning illuminating the figure with every flash, each time closer, as if it was pressing itself against the door. Desperate, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. I stood there, trembling, the knife gripped tightly in my hand, waiting for whatever was on the other side to break through. But it never did. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started. The storm outside seemed to die down as well, the thunder growing more distant, the rain lessening. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, and finally, I worked up the courage to approach the door again. I looked through the peephole. The figure was gone. All that remained was the empty porch, the rain-soaked welcome mat, and the fading sound of thunder in the distance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, the knife still in my hand, waiting for the dawn. When the first light of morning crept through my window, I finally let myself relax, thinking that whatever had happened was over. But it wasn't. For weeks after that night, every time a thunderstorm rolled in, I would hear those knocks on my door. Sometimes soft, sometimes loud, but always the same 3 knocks, as if it was waiting for me to open the door. I never did. I couldn't. Eventually the knocks stopped. But I'll never forget the fear that storm brought with it. Now, whenever I hear the distant rumble of thunder, I can't help but wonder if it's coming back, if it's still out there, waiting for me to open the door. And I hope I never find out. I always had a fascination with thunderstorms. My family lived on the outskirts of a small town right next to a dense forest. Our house was old, the kind that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, but it was home. Thunderstorms were a regular occurrence, especially in late summer, and I used to sit by the large bay window in our living room, watching the lightning illuminate the darkened forest beyond. But there was one storm, one night, that changed everything for me. It started like any other storm. The day had been unbearably hot, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and distorts reality. By the time evening rolled around, the sky had turned a sickly shade of greenish grey, and the first low rumbles of thunder could be heard in the distance. I remember my parents saying something about how it looked like it would be a bad one, but I wasn't worried. I was excited. I was 14 at the time, old enough to be left alone while my parents went out for the evening. They had plans to visit some friends in town, and I was more than happy to stay behind. I relished the idea of having the house to myself, of being able to watch the storm roll in without any distractions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the storm hit in full force. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the rain began to lash against the windows. I settled into my usual spot by the bay window, watching as the lightning danced across the sky, illuminating the forest in brief electric flashes. That's when I noticed something strange. In one of the flashes, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest just beyond our backyard. It was only for a split second, but it was clear as day. A man, or at least what looked like a man, standing perfectly still, staring at our house. I blinked, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, but then it happened again. Another flash, and the figure was closer, standing halfway between the tree line and our back porch. I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the storm, but there was something off about the way it stood. Too rigid, too unnatural. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the uneasy feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I grabbed my phone and texted my parents, telling them what I saw. They brushed it off, saying it was probably just a neighbor or an animal, but promised they'd head home soon. The storm intensified, the thunder growing louder, the lightning more frequent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, so I closed all the curtains and retreated to my room, hoping that putting some distance between me and the windows would calm my nerves. But it didn't. As I sat on my bed, trying to distract myself with some mindless TV, I heard it, a faint tapping sound, barely audible over the sound of the rain. I muted the TV, straining to hear. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the window behind me. I slowly turned around, dread pooling in my stomach. The curtains were closed, but I could see the outline of a hand pressed against the glass, its fingers long and thin, too long to be human. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the hand wasn't on the outside of the window, it was on the inside. I bolted from my room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my mind struggling to make sense of what I'd just seen. There was no way anyone could be in the house. The doors were locked, and I hadn't heard anyone come in. But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't my imagination. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the receiver. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice steady. They assured me that someone would be there soon and advised me to stay on the line. That's when the lights went out. The house was plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the occasional flash of lightning outside. The tapping had stopped, but now I could hear something else. a soft shuffling sound like someone moving slowly down the hallway. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the phone like a lifeline, listening as the footsteps grew closer. I whispered into the phone asking the dispatcher to hurry, but there was no response. The line had gone dead. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely alone, trapped in a dark house with something I couldn't explain. I knew I had to get out, but every instinct told me that whatever was in the house was waiting for me to make a move. Suddenly, the storm outside seemed to reach a crescendo, the thunder so loud it shook the walls, and for a brief moment the entire house was lit up by a blinding flash of lightning. In that instant, I saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, its face obscured by shadow, but its eyes glowing with a pale, unnatural light. I screamed and bolted for the front door, flinging it open and running out into the storm. The rain hit me like a wall, soaking me to the bone within seconds, but I didn't care. I just kept running, not daring to look back until I reached the road. I collapsed there, gasping for breath, the rain mixing with my tears. When the police arrived, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone else had been in the house. My parents arrived shortly after, worried and confused, but they believed me when they saw how shaken I was. We moved out of that house not long after. My parents said it was because they wanted to be closer to town, but I knew the real reason. They never talked about that night again, and neither did I, but I'll never forget the figure in the storm, the hand on the inside of the window, and the feeling that I had seen something I was never meant to see. Even now, years later, every time a thunderstorm rolls in, I can't help but remember that night, and I wonder, if it was waiting for me then, is it still waiting for me now? My brother and I were always close, despite our 4-year age gap. We grew up in a small town where nothing much ever happened, so we often made our own adventures. When I was 16 and he was 12, our favourite thing to do was explore the old abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. Most of them were relics of a bygone era, left to rot and fall apart. They were the perfect playground for kids with overactive imaginations. One evening in late July, we decided to check out an old farmhouse we'd heard rumours about. People in town said it was haunted, that strange things happened there when the weather turned bad. Of course, we didn't believe any of it. We figured it would be just another cool place to explore. The day was stiflingly hot, and the sky was heavy with dark clouds that promised a storm. My parents warned us to be careful and to come home if the weather got too bad, but we brushed them off. We had flashlights, snacks, and a sense of invincibility that only teenagers possess. The farmhouse was about a mile from our house, surrounded by overgrown fields and thick woods. It was an imposing structure, even from a distance, 2 stories tall with peeling paint, broken windows, and a sagging roof. As we approached, I could feel the temperature drop slightly, the air growing thick with the smell of rain. We got inside easily. The door was barely hanging on its hinges. The interior was even creepier than we expected. Dust covered every surface, and the air was stale and heavy. The house was filled with the remnants of a life long forgotten. Old furniture, yellowed newspapers, and a grandfather clock that had stopped at some point decades ago. Despite the eerie atmosphere, we were excited. We started exploring, moving from room to room, pointing out oddities and making up stories about who might have lived there. As we climbed the creaky stairs to the 2nd floor, the first rumbles of thunder echoed through the house. We both paused, looking at each other with wide eyes, but then laughed it off. What were the chances that the storm would hit while we were inside the haunted farmhouse? Upstairs, we found a series of bedrooms, all with broken windows that let in the first few drops of rain. One room, at the end of the hall, caught our attention. The door was closed unlike the others, and something about it felt off. I could tell my brother was uneasy, but I was too curious to turn back. I pushed the door open, and immediately a gust of cold wind hit us, strong enough to make the door bang against the wall. The room was empty except for a single wooden rocking chair in the center, facing the window. The air in the room was colder than the rest of the house, and the floorboards creaked as if someone had just stepped on them, even though neither of us had moved. My brother grabbed my arm. "We should go," he whispered, his voice trembling. I was about to agree when the storm outside seemed to explode. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in a blinding white light, and thunder crashed so loud it felt like the house itself was shaking. The door, which had been opened just a moment before, slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were plunged into darkness, our flashlights flickering and then going out completely. I could hear my brother's panicked breathing, and I reached out to grab his hand. We fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic set in. The storm outside was raging now, the wind howling through the broken windows, the rain lashing against the house. But inside that room, it was eerily silent. No sound except for our breathing and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then, we heard it. The soft creak of the rocking chair moving slowly back and forth. I froze. My brother squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. We couldn't see anything in the pitch-black room, but we could hear it. The unmistakable sound of wood scraping against wood as the chair rocked on its own. I don't know how long we stood there, paralyzed with fear, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, in a desperate attempt to escape, I threw my weight against the door. It burst open, and we tumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. We didn't stop to look back. We ran down the stairs, our footsteps echoing through the empty house, and burst out into the storm. The rain was pouring down, soaking us instantly, but we didn't care. We ran all the way home, not stopping until we were inside, the door locked behind us. My parents were furious at first. They'd been worried sick about us. But when they saw the state we were in, soaked to the bone, pale and shaking, their anger turned to concern. We didn't tell them everything that happened, just that the storm had scared us and we'd decided to come home. I'm not sure they would have believed us anyway. We never went back to that farmhouse. My brother refused to talk about it, and I didn't push him. But sometimes, late at night, when a storm is rolling in, I think about that room. I wonder if the chair is still there, rocking back and forth in the dark, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. And I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't escaped when we did.